Hello and welcome. My guest today is Mahadeva, a former exorcist, also fellow YouTube content creator with the channel The Thunder Wizard. He is a former exorcist and has all kinds of really interesting stuff to talk about. I really don't even know how to, cram it into one little description. But anyway, Mahadeva, how are you doing? Thank you for joining me.
I'm doing really well. Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Yeah, I'm really super fascinated with, I guess, the fact that you were a former exorcist. And from what I've gathered, that was a really long time ago, and you have grown and evolved, and you have, some very interesting perspectives and opinions on that. I guess, could we just start off with how you got into that and, where you are today?
Sure. Well, I grew up in your typical born-again Christian, fundamentalist Christian home as a kid. I went to Baptist church, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, I don't consciously remember having any interest in this. There was a funny interchange between me and my mother when I was 4 that she reminded me of. And if I thought about it, I actually remembered it. But we were in the kitchen and she was, joking around, and she said, "Oh, you little demon." And apparently I got very upset at that. And I said, "Don't you dare ever call me that ever again." And I'd never been to church or anything. I was 4 years old. And I remember at the time when it was happening, these words were coming out of my mouth like, I don't even know what she just said. But some part of me had this understanding. So I took that to mean that, this is something that was part of my path here on earth. So, I heard all of the same things that people heard in church, watching the movies about Jesus and all of that. That was really all that I knew about exorcism. I knew what to do because I heard people do it. You just say, "In Jesus' name, Satan, I command you." I knew that much. And so when I was, how old was I? I must have been 15. And a friend was staying over at my house, and we went down to this old, it sounds like it came straight out of a movie, but it was this old church that was on top of a cliff overlooking the ocean. And it had been built in the 1920s, and it was really spooky and all of that. And it turns out later, years later, had it been 5 or 10 years later, we find out that this church was built on top of an Indian burial ground. So there you go. So now you've got the perfect setup for your stereotypical horror movie. So he and I were doing what we were skateboarding, walking around, up to no good, smoking cigarettes. And this was a place I used to go all the time because it was really cool. It had all these like caves underneath, and there was all this stuff on the cliffs, and it was, just a place that kids hung out in the neighborhood. But when we walked in, it was at night, and we walked by, I saw lights flashing on and off in the church, and you saw shadows running past, and you could hear all this commotion. And I thought, oh, they're having a party or a fundraiser or something like that, right? That wasn't uncommon. We weren't supposed to be there. So we were skulking around, getting ready to see if we could get out of there without getting detected. And again, just like out of the movies, there was this huge, giant double wooden door that was fake. It went up, it was tall, but then it went up even higher than that to make it look like it was this huge door. Again, it was this guy's mansion from the 20s. It was a really old mansion. In any case, so we walked through into that, and something's not right about what's happening here. And I'm saying to my friend, we should just go. I don't feel right about being here. We should just go. And he says, no, let's figure out what it is. So I remember I was standing to the side, looking at the door from the side, like I could see it. And he went to put his ear up against the door, and I could see that he wasn't touching the door. He was probably about this far away from the door as he's doing this. And from inside, the door goes like somebody just banged it from the inside. And he went, and I took off running, right? and I was sure he was right behind me because, I thought somebody was going to come out of the church. What are you kids doing here? Right. And I turn around and he's nowhere to be found. And I walk back and he's in the exact same position I left him. Hasn't moved a muscle. And I go over to him and I say, come on, man, this isn't funny. Let's go. Let's go. Come on. This isn't funny. Let's go. And nothing. Didn't move. He didn't, nothing. And then I just sat down and I started getting like freaked out. Like, what the heck is going on? And then I don't know how long it was. It could have been 30 seconds. It could have been 10 minutes. I don't know. And that, time kind of went strange. And he slumped down and he was sweating and he was breathing hard. And he started talking strange, like saying that somebody was inside of him and was putting thoughts in his head and really freaky sounding stuff. And so I said, come on, let's go. Let's go. And so we walked back to the house and I don't know what my thought process was, but just get him out of there and get him back to my house. And as we're walking, he's getting weirder and weirder and saying stranger and stranger things. And then I said something to the effect of, like looking in his face and saying, Satan, you're an idiot, or I don't know what I was trying to do, but I was like trying to badmouth, obviously some spirit had jumped inside of him. And he starts saying, don't say that. Don't talk like that. It's telling me to do all kinds of things to you, push you off the cliff, kill you, things like that. And I just said, okay, that's it. We're going back to my house. So we go back to my house. And again, even though I'm, this rebellious teenager, I was still this hardcore born again Christian. And so I've got a Bible there in the room and all that kind of stuff. So we get in and then he sits down on the bed and he says, I'm fine. Everything's fine. I'm fine. It left. I'm fine. And so I put on, back then we had records. So I put on a record and I started, like dancing around to whatever it was, Styx or I don't know, some old 70s rock. And every time I like did something in his direction, he got like weird. And so I turned the music up. I said, okay, what's going on? I said, we're going to take care of this. And so I said, let's pray. So we both closed our eyes and started praying. I was sitting on the bed. He was lying up, in the bed up against the backboard like that. And so, I was able to like, if I wanted to put my hands on his chest or something like that, sitting on the bed, he's lying like this. And so I'm saying, Lord God, Jesus, I'm doing that whole Christian thing. And then with his head down, he starts shaking. He starts and making these growling noises, and I thought he was afraid. I thought the demon was frightening him. So I went to go put my hand on his chest to say to him, it's okay, it's just me, right? And as my hand came down towards his chest, he lifted his head up and he was not the same person. His skin had completely changed to the color of this cup. Not like it was pale, like it had completely changed to a completely different substance. It was white as white can be. Where his eyes was just red, not bloodshot, just absolutely, completely red. And he was going, it was like, wah, wah. So out of instinct, I put my hand on his chest and I started doing what they did in the Bible, in Jesus' name, Satan, I command you. And then whatever it was looking past me, like past my shoulder at whatever was behind me. Apparently there was somebody else in the room that we couldn't see. And he was frightened of that, whatever that being was. And he's trying to get away from my hand, like he's desperately trying, like my hand is burning him or something. So I don't know how long this went on. In Jesus' name, Satan, blah, blah, blah. And I'm looking through you into the eyes of the demon inside of you. Blah, blah, blah. And so then he slumps back down. And his breathing goes back to normal. And then he raises his head up and he's normal again. And then a really strange thing happened. We both started laughing hysterically because it was such a relief. I think whatever was going on is whatever higher beings were there were just getting rid of the heavy nature of it all. So we laughed and felt really good. And then I asked him what happened. And he said, he explained what happened, that something jumped inside of him at the church and was telling him all kinds of strange things to do, and telling him to do all these horrible things to himself or to me. And then he said, when you started praying, I started going backwards down this cave, and backwards. I started flowing backwards and backwards and backwards. And when I woke up, I was in this like dark cave, and there was like water down in there, and way up at the top there was this light, and I could hear you praying. And then all of a sudden I was back up, and I came back up, and when I opened my eyes, you were there, and we left. And so I had, what I'm about to say shouldn't frighten anybody. I can explain later what it all means, but I had remembered what it said in the Bible when Jesus cast out demons. He says when a demon is cast out, the demon comes back to his home, which is the person's body, and finds it swept clean. So he goes out into the wilderness and finds 7 other spirits stronger than himself, comes back 10 days later. I don't know why they said that. 10 days later, and then the last state of the man is worse than the first, right? So I told him, you've got to start praying. You've got to start going to church. Otherwise, the demon's going to come back in 10 days. And he didn't do those things. And sure enough, 10 days later, he was walking around his house, and he was afraid, and something grabbed him by the neck and picked him up and put him like up against the wall, like his feet weren't touching the ground, and then dropped him. So that was my first experience with that, with exorcism. And looking back on it, I should have been scared out of my mind. I should have not known what to do, but I just instinctively reacted, and it seemed totally natural to me. It didn't frighten me all that much. And so I didn't think about it again. I went through some rebellious teenage years, drugs and alcohol, et cetera, et cetera. And then I got religion again. And then after I went back and, had a big conversion experience and went back and had, started doing all that religious stuff, I would just be places. I would be somewhere, and things like people would walk up to me and say, somebody's inside of me and I know you can help, things like that. And, there was at least a couple of times, because I was a church going guy and we did things like perform. I was an actor as well. We'd perform at churches doing church plays. And at least a couple of times I showed up, and there would be some guy who had just given his life to Satan in some seance or something, and he was possessed, and I would be like the only person that knew what to do. And so the whole thing, put my hand on their chest, Satan, I command you. And same kind of stuff happening. Lots of projectile vomiting and really horrible things that they say, and really frightening feelings and stuff like that. And after doing that a few times and then coming home, what would happen is I'd come home, and then at night, what would happen is my mind would sort of release what was really going on energetically, because physically you're looking at it and it's just kind of strange and weird, and it's awkward and frightening, but somebody could look at it and go, those people are just nuts. But you get back home and you start replaying it in your mind, and you start to feel what was really going on, and it was really ugly. The energy was just really ugly. And every single time, what I found is that every person, I can only speak for myself, but every person that I did an exorcism on, in order to get the spirit to leave, I would have to get them to forgive somebody that had abused them. So I learned to do that. Almost immediately I'd go, okay, who abused you? Tell me who abused you, and they'd be like, the demon would be there, and then they'd come back. And while I had them, I'd have to rush to get them. You have to tell me who abused you. And so invariably it would be somebody, sexually, physically, emotionally, some horrific kind of abuse. And then I would say, you have to forgive Uncle so-and-so. And if they said no, the demon would come back. And, I have to say, the demon's not going to leave until you forgive whoever harmed you. And then if they could say, I forgive so-and-so, then I could cast the demon out. And then I'd sit them down and I'd say, listen, here's what you got to do. You got to get your life together. You got to stop doing drugs. You got to start going, seeing your counselor on a regular basis, talk to your pastor. You got to get your life together. If you don't, it will come back. And almost invariably, they never did. And I got the real clear conclusion that what's going on is that these are people who are attracting demons on an unconscious level. They're actually, at the very least, sending out a very strong message that I need something to distract me. And, you know, when you're in horrific amounts of emotional pain, it's always trying to come into your conscious awareness. Your mind is constantly trying to heal that wound. But if you don't have the skills to do it, or you don't feel worthy of it, or whatever, you know, and people get addicted to being victimized too. So, you know, without that, they don't know how to function. So when somebody's like that and they can't tolerate the feelings, then they seek to have some kind of experience to distract them. And what is more distracting than having a demon inside of you, you know, attacking you in your sleep, or, you know, cutting your skin, or, you know, moving you around, or, you know, doing all the crazy stuff that, you know, real demon attacks do. And by the way, let me just say, it is also my experience that the vast majority of people who talk about being demon possessed usually aren't, but it's the same scenario. They are manifesting within themselves some kind of, you know, spiritual victimization to distract them. People who are really possessed, you know, that kind of stuff, when you see it and experience it, you're like, okay, this isn't somebody with mental problems. I mean, they have mental problems, but, you know, this is a real thing that's happening here. So I decided to stop doing that, because I realized that what these people needed was therapy more than exorcism, and it was just too taxing on me. And so I said, I'm not doing this anymore. And so anybody watching doesn't know me, you might think I'm a born-again Christian. I'm not anymore. I've walked away from Christianity. It was my personal choice. People have the right to have whatever beliefs that they want, so I don't judge anybody for what their particular religion of choice is. I've walked away from Christianity. But one of the first things that happened when I did that was that I ran into, I was looking to start training in martial arts, and I was in my mid-20s. And I was thinking about, you know, which martial art, because I didn't want to do a violent one. My whole thing was that I was actually a very angry person. And I hadn't been in a fist fight, but I was one of those people that when I walked down the street, everybody got the hell out of my way. I scared the hell out of everybody. I was so angry. And it was just coming off of me in waves. And so I also knew that what used to happen to me when I was a little kid, because I was the shortest kid in school, so I always got picked on. All the bigger kids always picked on me. And I had an older, physically abusive brother, so I had a hair trigger. And what would happen is these, you know, this is what happens when you're the shortest kid in school, the big kids come up and pick fights with you. And what would happen is I would black out. You know, I'm like 10, 11 years old, 12 years old. I'd black out, and then I'd come to, and there'd be some kid on the ground, you know, just, you know, and I'd look, and my fists were red, and I'm like, what happened? You know, and I would find out really quickly that what was happening is that I was blacking out and, you know, pummeling the crap out of whoever it was. You know, just a really not an accurate reaction to what was happening. There was something really up with me. So as I got older, and then luckily for me, this is a good thing, kids started growing before me, and I was like the toughest kid in school, even though I was a little kid. And then I started getting beat up by the kids who were going through puberty, and I said, wow, this doesn't feel good. I'm going to stop fighting. So I stopped fighting because I didn't like getting beat up. And but then when I got to be, you know, 18, 19, 20 years old, all of that anger started coming up. And I knew, you know, if I black out this time, it's not going to be a little kid on the ground, you know, with a bruised face. He's going to be dead. And I didn't want to hurt anybody. I didn't want to end up in jail. I didn't want any of that. So I started looking to train in martial arts, not to beat people up, but so that I didn't have to fight, so that I wouldn't be afraid, and if I did get into a situation, I would have skills instead of just rage. So I was looking for a specific martial art, and one of the more spiritual Chinese, whatever. And I run it, it's just, again, just like a movie. I'm working this temp job, and this Native American guy, he's like 6'2", hair down to the floor, just out of the movie, just looks like the spiritual guy. And I'm telling my friend, should I do Wing Chun or should I do Aikido? And he looks and he says, are you looking to train in a martial art? And I said, yeah. And he said, what are you looking for? And I told him I was looking for something more spiritual. And he says, come to this class. And he gave me a date and a time. And I said, okay. Now I had some training, so I wanted to know what it was. And I said, what is it? He says, just come to the class, you'll see. I said, no, tell me. I mean, do you guys, what happens with this? And whatever he said just didn't make any sense. I'm like, okay. He says, just trust me, just come to the class, see what they're doing, and we'll take it from there. Now, it turns out it was one of this invite only thing. You couldn't get in unless you were invited by one of the students or by the teacher. And it was a secret thing. You couldn't tell anybody about it. I can't make this stuff up. So I show up, and there's my tall Native American friend and this little Japanese guy who's even shorter than me. He's probably 5'6" or something. And they're both doing what looks like this tap dance. And I was lifting a lot of weights back then. So I walk in and I'm trying not to laugh because it's like, it looks so silly. I had been, invited there. I didn't want to be rude. So anyway, they start showing me these weird postures and things like that. And I'm trying to get my elbows to touch, and I couldn't because my chest was so, and I'm trying to get in these weird Chinese postures. And then they start telling me that this is about fighting demons. This isn't about fighting humans. It's about fighting demons. Now, if you looked at it, it would look like one of those weird Chinese kung fu things. For those of us, if you're a Western martial artist, you look at it, you go, I don't know what the hell they're doing. But they're dancing around doing some weird kung fu thing. And I'm trying to do these postures in it. And at the end of the class, this little Japanese guy, says, okay, let's get around. Now we're going to do practical applications. And he starts talking about it. And he starts talking about these guys who have this ability to fight demons with their bare hands, and how if you practice this kind of stuff, you can, go out of your body. And he starts talking about all this crazy stuff. And I'm only like 3 or 4 years out of Christianity at this point. And I'm like, what the hell have I just gotten myself into? And I still have that old Christian thing in my mind that says anybody that has spiritual power that doesn't confess Jesus is demonic. And so I don't know what the hell is happening here. And so he walks up to me and he says, I'm going to show you what this is about. First, he does a bunch of applications on the other students, which didn't look real. Like he barely tapped them, and they'd like fall to the ground. And you hear him just barely touch somebody, but you hear this loud thud or this smack. And it was just like, what am I watching here? So he comes up to me, he says, I'm going to show you what this is. And he's talking about energy, internal energy. And what we're doing is we're creating all this energy in our body. And he starts doing this, literally this, in the air. And like, I'm standing here, my chest is here, and he's making his way over to my chest, and he's doing it in the air. So he's letting me see that he's not winding up and he's going to crack me really hard. He's saying, I'm just going to do this. Right. And before that, he had said, here, grab onto my elbow. And he says, I'm going to do this to this guy. So I was holding his elbow, and he, taps the guy, and you hear this thud, and the guy falls to one knee. And he says, did I tense up? I said, no. Did you feel me hit him hard? I said, no, you weren't doing anything. He says, yeah, it's just energy. So he gets to me and he goes like this. And he taps me, thud. And I feel this explosion inside of me. And it felt like somebody had screamed at my soul. I don't know how else to explain it. And I felt my soul jump out of my body for half a second. And it was you can imagine. And it physically hurt. Like if he had wanted to, he could have, crushed my ribs. I mean, he could have just devastated me. And he was obvious that he was just doing a little bit of the energy. And so I had a really good poker face because I had an older brother that used to beat the crap out of me. And if you showed pain or cried, he'd hit you harder. So I learned a long time ago not to do anything. So he thuds me with that. And I do my poker face thing. And I'm like, holy crap. And he goes, like, he thinks he didn't hit me hard enough. So he goes, here, let me show you again. Hits me again. This time it's harder. Ugh, my soul jumps out of my body. I want to run out of there screaming. And I still got the poker face. So he goes, okay, here, let me show you once again. And I almost ran out of there. I mean, I felt like a little girl. I almost ran out of there screaming. I could have picked this guy up and thrown him across the room. And I knew that there was nothing I could do. If this guy wanted to, whatever he wanted to do, there was nothing I was going to do to stop it. Not a damn thing. And he hit me one last time and I couldn't, hide it. And he goes, oh, there, you see what that feels like? But what was interesting is that he says, because my intention is healing, this energy is healing me. And it did. It would like go through my whole body and you could feel all the energy meridians and chakras opening up and you could feel all this energy. And so I was hooked. I had to do it. And, I was big and I was stiff. And I knew I was going to have to drop some weight to be able to do it. But I said, if that little Japanese guy can do this, I can do it. And I don't know why. It's just something I've always had in me. And I think it's been a really helpful thing to know that if somebody else can do it, I can do it. And so I did. I committed myself to learning that. And sure enough, I learned a lot about energy and demons. And now, like now, I would never go to one of those ghost hunting things, not because of anything other than if I went, the ghosts would leave. They wouldn't hang out because you create an energy in you that's at a vibration that they can't handle. And demons really are, I'm not going to get too deep into it, but basic bottom line is that demons are always associated with negative human emotions. Their names, like when I was doing exorcisms, and I would say, one of the ways you would do is you would get the demon to give you their name because then you'd have control over them. So I'd say, in Jesus' name, I command you to tell me your name, and their name would always be an emotion: greed, sadness, lust, anger, rage. It would never be, Beelzebub, or it would never be anything like that. It would be an emotion every single time. And so what I learned was that operating at those higher levels was a place where you could be at a level of peace, and that higher vibration is really what frightens the demons away. And so again, we circle back to what I learned, decades earlier, or a decade or so earlier, which was that what people really need if they're being attacked by negative entities is they need to go work through those feelings. They need to feel them. They need to, first and foremost, learn to love themselves. Because if you truly love yourself, you won't allow anybody to abuse you. You won't do it. You just won't. You won't volunteer. And in order for a negative entity to harm somebody, you've got to volunteer for that, even if it's on an unconscious level, even if you have no idea that that's what you're doing. But that's what has to happen. But if you learn to value yourself, when you see that you are infinite, that you are God, that you are Jesus, you are Buddha, whatever your particular background is, when you identify with that, and what'll happen is you'll find out, if somebody's been in this situation, they'll find out that that they have an unconscious agenda to devalue themselves in the mistaken idea that that's what it'll take to fit in, to be loved, to be accepted. And so that's why it's so challenging for people to love themselves, and why people do. You would say, why would somebody, want to ask for some spirit to come and abuse them? Well, it's because it's painful. Because if you've been devalued in your life and you start to love yourself, the first thing that's going to happen is you will feel the pain of the rejection that caused you to want to devalue yourself to begin with. So people say, well, if you get rid of the demon, how come people just aren't happy? Well, because now they have to really face the fact that they've been trained to devalue themselves in the hopes of getting love from their abusive parents, hope from getting love from a devaluing society that only loves you for what you look like or how much money you have or how famous you are. And when you realize that when it's your connection to the infinite, the only thing that gives you validity is the fact that you exist. And there's nothing you can do beyond that. There's nothing you can do, nothing you can say, nothing you can think. Nothing at all will ever give you more value in the universe than just the fact that you are a conscious being. And that sounds great, except that we've been trained to get our acceptance based on what we do. Even if it's being a good person or being a spiritual guru or being a nurse, or even people who say, no, I'm just here to help others. Well, that's where you get your worth. We call that codependence. You get your worth from helping others, from fixing others. But that's just the same as trying to get your worth from being rich or famous or good looking. It's all superficial. None of those things give us value. And so the most challenging thing for human beings in 3D to do is to really just be with ourselves and love ourselves. There's nothing. This is why the spiritual masters who live in caves in the Himalayas, they just wear diapers and the only thing they own is a walking stick, and that's it. But we revere them as extremely spirituals because when you ask them, they will know, yeah, I have the bliss of existence within myself. I'm one with everything. I don't need anything. I don't need a house. I don't need money. I've got everything that I need. So that was a really long answer to your question. Like I said, you get me started on a subject, it's hard to shut me up. But
no, that's totally cool. Like I said, I kind of prefer that. I did have a question because, like I said before, I started recording. It's something that I've been dealing with and working through. I'm not nearly as knowledgeable as you, so I'm not making a claim one way or the other, but I do really feel like I have had some serious attachments, like serious. And for the past few years, I've been working through a lot of it, but I still have a little bit of something that lives in me that can still take control of my emotions and my vibrational state. And one of the things that I'm curious about, because like I said, personally, I was born into an abusive situation that was ugly. What if you don't really remember all of the trauma? How you said, you ask who hurt you. And like for me, I know that it was abusive, but the majority of that abuse I buried and I don't really remember it. Do you know how to go about maybe dealing with that or approaching that?
Well, first off, I'd like to say I don't think it's necessary to have, again, we're getting into perfectionism. That's part of self-devaluation, is being a perfectionist. So we're being a little perfectionist here about, trying to remember every single, of course, you're not going to remember everything. It's possible that many things will come to your awareness as you continue to heal. So I would say, you're asking me specifics how to do it is begin the healing process and continue to, whatever that is, therapy and or meditation and or whatever it is. And let the awareness, continue to expand when you're able, because the universe is also kind. It's not going to, it's very likely if you were made aware of everything all at once, it would, might kill you. It might just be too much. So you'll learn what you need to learn and work through when it's time. And it may also be necessary, may also be true that you don't have to remember everything. Having said that, the practical thing that you can do is exactly, what I teach. So what I didn't say is that on my channel, what I do is I've got all those exercises, and I've got all those energy practices. Like for instance, the Awakening the Immortals. That's one of the free practices that I give on my channel. And just by doing that energy, as it comes into your body, if there really is some kind of attachment, it'll drive that away. And the more that you do it, the more your vibration will rise to a point where those entities won't want to come near you. And of course, as you do it, though, feelings are going to come up. It might be challenging feelings, but the more that you work through those feelings, again, the less there's going to be for something to attach to, because they're attaching to the unresolved feelings. And these are things that you are choosing not to deal with. So you choose not to deal with them. That's like you're handing a platter with food on it. You're saying, here, feast on this. And so you can make the choice. Again, I used to do exorcisms and I'd get rid of the demons. They'd leave, but the internal programming would bring them back. So the thing to do is to change the internal programming. You do the exercises, you continue, going to therapy, doing whatever the work is that you're doing, and there won't be anything for the demon to come home to. Even that Christian verse was accurate. When the demon leaves, comes back, it finds its home swept clean, meaning doors locked, you can't come in. And so you do have power. And you also have power when it's happening. So for instance, the way I heard you say it was, and you can correct me, but the way I heard you say it, I remember it was that it takes away your ability to handle your emotions or your responses or something like that.
Yeah, pretty much.
So I would change the language of that first and foremost. You still are making all of the decisions. It feels like something's taking over you. But what's really happening is you're giving your power over to something else so you can say that. I can't help it. And I mean, it's interesting. I almost never share that story of as a little kid blacking out and beating up other little kids, because it's, I mean, imagine me telling that on a first date. She'd be like, I don't think I want to date you. It's not something I'm proud of. It's not something that but the truth is that, that I was dissociating, but that's because I didn't want to handle the intense amount of rage that was inside of me. It was a choice I was making. At some point, we make the choice. So you feel like you don't have control, but the truth is that on some level you do. And instead of telling yourself you don't, you say, no, I have control over this. I choose to act. And I've got a definition for enlightenment. People ask me all the time about enlightenment. And they ask me about all kinds of other things. I also, like you, I saw some of your channel. You got some really great videos on how to create the life that you want. And I really agreed with what you were saying, at least in the video I was watching. And so people ask me, how do I get over my fear? And I said, when did I ever say you were supposed to get over anything? I've never once said you have to change your feelings. Never. The only thing I say is you change your actions. So the definition of enlightenment isn't that you reach this state of perfection where you have no problems and everything is beautiful and I am full of bliss all the time. No, that's not enlightenment. That's being high, and anybody can do that. And everybody's perfect when all of the chemicals are aligned. There's nobody that's, everybody can be perfect then. It's when you don't feel good. It's when you're pissed off, angry, afraid, lonely, scared, whatever it is. That's the time that you need to be enlightened. And enlightenment is knowing what the constructive action is, regardless of how you feel. Everything in you tells you to jump off a cliff, throw a hammer through a window, whatever. But you go, no, instead, I'm going to do what I know is healthy for myself and healthy for others. And the challenging part is, in those moments, what is most healthy for you and for others will feel like it's killing you. So this is really what's happening in those moments when you feel like you're losing control and you're reacting, obviously in some negative way. It's because the feeling of not acting out is intolerable. Worse than that, for instance, like I don't like small talk. Like if I go to the store, it just drives me crazy when
I'm the same way.
And they want to go, hey, bro, I'm like, dude, I'm twice your age. Don't call me bro. I want to say that. Did you watch the big game? And I want to say, look, just ring up my groceries. You're not my friend. Stop wasting my time. But that person has been told by their supervisor who's over there watching him that he has to do that. Somehow they learned that, people are insecure, and if you pretend to be their friends, they'll buy more groceries or something. I don't know. So everything in me wants to do that, wants to tell them hey, just put the groceries and instead I go, oh no, I haven't. Did you? I say the exact opposite, and I hate doing it. But that's the kind thing to do. That's the constructive thing to do. And so I do the thing that is most difficult. Now, for some people, like, and again, for me, like if I was out in public, still to this day, if I was out in public and somebody gave me the stink eye, or if somebody bumped into me, and I'm getting too old to do this now, but if that happens, my instinct is to get in their face and to scare them, because I learned how to do that when I was young. That's the overwhelming desire comes up in me to do that. And it feels like it's killing me if I don't, because it reminds me of my older brother who used to beat the crap out of me and intimidate me and all that. And so to be weak and allow somebody to do that is just intolerable. That feeling like somebody's dominating me, I can't tolerate it. But, the thing to do is to do the exact opposite. And so you say, hey, I'm sorry. Hey, if I did something to upset you, I'm really sorry. I hope you have a beautiful day. You smile. You act as though you're this loving, kind person who isn't insecure. And then you go home and you go, oh man, what I should have said to that guy was. That's enlightenment. Enlightenment has very little to do with feeling peaceful or happy. It has everything to do with having the awareness of knowing what to do and then having the strength to act on it. You learned that about your success. You laid it out very clearly. You made an intention. You were going to make six figures, and you just did whatever the hell you had to do to make that happen. You didn't let anything get in your way. And so that would be my suggestion to you. Those times when it comes up and you feel like you don't have any, even if I give you the benefit of the doubt and there is some force that's doing that, you have the power to say, I'm not going to do that. You have the power. And, what Christianity didn't teach me was that just because I am a living, breathing, conscious being, I have the power to defeat any negative spirit, any demon. And that's true of any human being alive. It is the light within us. And that light is infinity. And I don't have more infinity in me than you do. You have the same amount of infinity as I do. So, one of the things I tell my students is imagine what I would do in that situation. Or I can say, you know what, you can even call on my energy and let me do it for you. Of course, that's not happening. Let me be clear. It's something that helps us disengage from our own program. So you could imagine, well, what would Mahadeva do if you felt this negative energy? I mean, I would look it in the face and I'd say, I'm going to tear you apart. You're mine. You're my bitch. I own you. So because I know that the spirit inside of me is more powerful than any negative entity because they're limited. I'm not, because I'm human. Because I know that, and they know I know that, they don't come anywhere near me. I had my ex-wife. She was a petite woman, and because of her history, she knew how to go out in public. She knew how to, without looking anything, she would just adopt this attitude that nobody's going to touch me. And she could be in the worst part of town, and sure enough, nobody would come near her. Bad guys would stay the hell away from her. So it's the same is true with negative entities. But it's really a projection. I'm going to, forgive me if I'm going a little too far with this, but
you're fine.
So projection is, in case anybody don't know, and I recommend anybody look it up. Look up psychological projection. Everything is a projection, which means we project onto our reality our own internal dynamics. So if I can direct this at you. So if you have this experience that there's some kind of energy attaching itself to you that takes over you at some point, that's a projection of what you felt like as a kid. You had no power, and somebody else had the ability to literally attach themselves to your physical body and do things to you without your permission. And so what ends up happening is, in order to relive that reality, we experience it with demons. And when you grow up, when you're a kid, other human beings have the power to do things to you. You can't stop them. Then you grow up into an adult, and so objectively, no, other adult humans don't necessarily have the power to control me like that. But I still feel that way. So instead of seeking it out in my dynamics with other humans, I'll seek it out with spirits. I'll find a spirit and I'll tell him, listen, I'll pretend that you're more powerful than me so that I can stay in this spot. And I'm willing to bet, I don't know, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm willing to bet that in those moments when you lose control, it's usually around a really sensitive issue of yours that is really painful. It's not like you're walking around and you're feeling really wonderful and all of a sudden you get taken over by something and you tackle somebody and beat them up. No, it's going to be when your issues or your insecurities already been probably stimulated. Like when I would lose my temper, thankfully, when I did get beat up as a little kid, it stopped me from fighting. So I haven't been in any physical fights. Luckily, I've either been able to intimidate my way out of them or avoid them. But I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, well, that thought just flew out of my head. So I can't finish it.
There was something else I'd kind of like to touch on a little bit. A video I watched of yours the other night where you were talking about shadow work. And or I don't know if you called it shadow work, or mainly I don't remember everything that you talked about, but it seemed like you were covering a lot of the misconceptions that some people have about doing shadow work. Do you know what I'm talking about? Am I wording that right? Is there any way we could touch on that a little bit?
We can. I'm not sure if I know exactly what you're talking about, but I personally don't like the word shadow work, and it's a personal thing. Even though it's a Jungian term where you look at your shadow side. But the reason I don't like it is because it gives this feeling of something separate from you. Like there's your shadow, And, the truth is the shadow has nothing to do with you. It's light that's being, blocked out. It's not a part of you at all. So I don't like that feeling it gives. I like the idea that everything is me. Everything that's negative is me. Everything that's positive is me. Excuse me. So if I'm hearing you right, let me just confirm. By shadow work, do you mean finding your inner strength, or do you mean looking at your negativity? What do you mean by that?
I'm thinking, what I was thinking when I was listening to the video was that it was like looking at your negativity. And
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, the truth is negativity and positivity are two sides of the same coin. So just to give you an example, I'm going to use a really, really horrific example, but it's true. So Jeffrey Dahmer, right? There's a new thing on Netflix about Jeffrey Dahmer, and there was one scene in it which really actually showed exactly what's happening with him. The thing about Jeffrey Dahmer isn't that he is an evil genius who is bent on harming and destroying people. It's not what's happening with him. That's what he does. I mean, he was a monster. He was horrible. I mean, one of the worst serial killers that's ever lived. It was horrific. But his internal environment was that what he wanted was to be loved. And so he would find somebody that he felt an attraction to. And they'd come over to his place and they'd make a connection. Like he would feel a friendship connection with them. And then, because he had mental illnesses, because of the abuse he suffered as a kid, he would then become terrified of being abandoned. And the thought of being rejected was unbearable for him. And then he would snap, and then he would attack them and kill them. But if you ask him, he would say, no, I just didn't want them to leave. I liked them. I felt close to them. So his negativity, his shadow side, is no different than somebody else's positive side, except for the way that he reacts to it. He responds to it completely backwards. And so if he had the ability, again, we would have to go back in time to when he was a little kid. And, based on what I know, his mom, I think, may have had a mental illness as well and was really abusive to him and all that. If we could go back into time when he was a little kid, and instead of being rejected because he had a feeling, because he was lonely or he wanted love, instead of being told, go away, get out of here with those feelings, leave me alone, which made him, as a little baby or as a little kid, horrifically rejected, which turned into something really nasty. If he had been said, come here, little Jeffrey, it's so beautiful that you need to be loved. I'm rewarding you for needing love and wanting to be loved. Then he would grow up as this person who would say, everybody just needs to be loved. And whenever somebody is mean to me, I turn around to them and I tell them how beautiful they are. He would do the opposite, but it would come from the same impulse. The impulse of, I want to be loved. And instead of responding to the pain because he's afraid of being hurt, instead of that, he would respond to the pain of being hurt by giving the other person what he would want for himself. So the projection of Jeffrey Dahmer was that he didn't believe that he was worthy of love, which is why he couldn't imagine why anybody that he liked would want to stay friends with him. He assumed that once they walked out the door, they would decide he was worthless and they'd never want to see him again. He couldn't tolerate that, so he hit him over the back of the head, and the rest of the story. So our shadow side, now you figured this out with your business, right? Because in order to say to yourself, I'm going to make a 6-figure income, then you have to then enjoy the idea of you putting yourself out there being seen, right? that couldn't have been easy. I imagine that was challenging. You probably felt a lot of shame, a lot of guilt, a lot of fear, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
That was your shadow side. But those were reactions to something really beautiful in you, which was your spirit that said, I want to give something to the world. And I want to be rewarded for the beauty within me. And your probably many of your responses to that was, no, you shouldn't do that. That's stupid. You don't deserve to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But you're responding to something beautiful. You're not responding to a shadow. You're not responding to something negative. And what we will realize when we're all done with this three-dimensional school, because that's what it is. When we're done with this three-dimensional school and we go back to higher dimensions, we're going to realize that everything comes from love. There's nothing that happens in the multiverse that doesn't come from love. We in 3D think that things don't come from love, but even the most horrible people on the planet, and there are some people that are doing some really horrible things, those horrible people, what they're doing is they are operating from a warped positive feeling. What you did, you said to yourself, I want to take this beauty and I want to share it with the world, and I want to make a six-figure income and help a lot of people. You then had your shadow come up and say, you can't do that. You don't deserve to do that. And you said, I'm going to do it anyway. In that moment, you were enlightened. You said, I hear that feeling. It's horrible, but I'm going to take action that I know is healing for me and for others, regardless of how challenging it is for me to feel that. And when we're out of this dimension, we don't bump into that. There's just this feeling of love that comes out. And so this 3D reality is really about learning what you've already learned, which is, I know the beauty within me, and I'm going to act on that regardless of how I feel. And it would be extremely, extremely difficult, but it wouldn't be impossible for Jeffrey Dahmer to have, when he felt like he really connected with somebody and they were going to leave, and everything in him said, I have to crack him over the head and keep them here, he would instead do the opposite and say, nope, I wouldn't want that. I want to give something happy to this person. I'm going to let them leave. That would have been the kindest thing he could have done. He could have chosen to do that in any and every moment of his being. But we lie to ourselves when we say we don't have the power. When we say I'm a victim, that I can't do that. I couldn't stop myself. Those are lies. Those are lies we tell ourselves in order to avoid the pain that's associated with really being one with our light side, instead of the shadow side. Anyway, it's getting a little convoluted, but I think you understand.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm sure after I post this, there will probably be people who want to reach out to you with questions. Would you be okay with that?
Yeah, they can go to my channel, the thunderwizard.com YouTube channel. And yeah, it's spelled Thunderwizard, DOTCOM. And they can leave questions on any of the video comments, that I encourage that, people leaving questions, because I'll make videos on the questions people leave. And then on that YouTube site, there are, you see on the side, there's all those links, so they can find me, they can find my services, and, if they want a session with me, or if they want to take one of my courses, they'll have access to all those if they go visit the channel.
Awesome. I will definitely.
But they can't, I guess I can just give you a quick one. If somebody just wants to go and see my teaching channel, they can go to thunderwizard.com.
Okay, cool. I will link all that in the description of the video. Before we wrap it up, would there maybe be a last positive message you would want to leave for the viewers? Maybe anybody that is worried about struggling with some of these things?
Well, my positive message is that you can do it. That you can do and be anything you want, and you can overcome any challenge. If you've been incarnated in this physical world, it means that you have the ability. And I mean, I wouldn't wish my childhood on anybody, and I'm not trying to compete with anybody because I know there are people that have had things worse than me. But I know that I went through things and overcame things that a lot of people, you know, might not have. And there have been times when it felt impossible and I made it. But you've got to be willing to reach out and get help. So, you know, whether that's 12-step groups, you know, like AA, NA, CODA, or if it's working with a therapist, or if it's finding a mentor, you know, we can't do this alone. We need to have the fearlessness to reach out and be seen by somebody else and do the work to heal.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, that was very, very informative. I greatly appreciate you joining me again. I am going to go ahead and wrap this up. I'm definitely going to be a regular viewer of your channel and might have you back on here again someday if you're down with that.
Yeah, whenever you want.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, you have a good day. Okay.
All right, my brother. Take care.
All right.